Your pathetic little well is on an expired easement, Colonel. As of this morning, your water access is terminated. Have a nice day. Karen, the HOA president and self-appointed queen of our subdivision, stood on my property line with a smirk that could curdle milk. Her floral muumuu fluttered in the breeze, a garish flag planted on conquered territory. Behind her, two burly men I didn't recognize were cranking a heavy cast-iron valve near the road, the screech of metal on metal echoing the grating finality in her voice. A torrent of muddy water coughed from a release pipe, then slowed to a trickle, then stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. My water, the lifeblood of my 5 acres, the source that fed my home and irrigated the small orchard my wife Sarah and I had painstakingly planted, was gone. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, a feeling I hadn't experienced since a dusty street in Fallujah. This wasn't a dispute over lawn height or the color of a mailbox. This was a siege. She had just declared war, using the most fundamental resource as her weapon, and she was doing it with the smug satisfaction of a tyrant who believed she was untouchable. The financial loss was immediate and catastrophic. Without water, my orchard would be dust in a week, and our home would be uninhabitable. The humiliation was the point, a public spectacle for the entire neighborhood to see the retired Army colonel brought to his knees by a piece of paper and a rusty valve. She thought she had me. She thought she had cut off my supply line and that I would surrender. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend, was that for 25 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, my entire life had been about water, building systems, securing them, and, when necessary, taking them apart. And more importantly, she had no idea that for the last 2 years, I had been serving as the elected county water commissioner. She hadn't just picked a fight with a homeowner, she had just illegally tampered with the water supply of the man who wrote the damn rules. Her war was about to meet its Waterloo. If you've ever been pushed to the brink by a petty tyrant on an HOA board, hit that subscribe button right now. I want to hear your own nightmare stories in the comments below, and let me know where you're watching from, because this kind of power trip knows no zip code. Now let me tell you how I dismantled her little kingdom, piece by piece, using nothing but her own rulebook and the full weight of the law she so arrogantly ignored. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's a field manual on how to win a war against a bully who thinks they hold all the cards. My journey to this manicured corner of hell began, as many do, with a search for peace. After a quarter-century of service, moving from one dusty, chaotic corner of the world to another, all Sarah and I wanted was a piece of land to call our own. We found it in a 5-acre plot on the edge of the Whispering Pines development. The property itself wasn't actually part of the HOA. It was an older grandfathered plot with its own well, but it was bordered on 3 sides by their pristine, cookie-cutter homes. When we bought it, our lawyer pointed out an old easement agreement from the 1970s. The original farmer who owned our land had granted the developer, the one who built Whispering Pines, permission to run a secondary, non-potable irrigation line across a 10-foot strip at the far edge of our property. In exchange, he was given a tap on that line as a backup water source. The agreement was old, dusty, and seemed utterly irrelevant since our private well, drilled deep into the aquifer, was more than sufficient. We signed the papers, built our home, and for 3 blissful years we lived our quiet life. I took up a position on the county commission, a low-stress civil service role as the water commissioner, thinking it would be a gentle way to transition into civilian life, dealing with municipal bonds and drought contingency plans. It was peaceful. Then Karen was elected HOA president. Our first run-in was over my workshop, a modest metal building set a good 300 yards from any HOA property where I restored old engines. She sent a violation notice claiming it was an unapproved agricultural structure visible from their scenic walking trail. The letter was dripping with passive-aggressive legalese. I responded with a certified copy of my property survey and a polite note explaining that my land was not under her jurisdiction. The response was a doubling of the fine and a threat of a lien. It was then I realized Karen wasn't interested in rules. She was interested in control. She saw my 5 acres of independence as a personal affront. an untamed patch of wilderness, spoiling the view from her perfectly regulated kingdom. She couldn't stand that I wasn't one of her subjects, so she went digging. She must have spent weeks in the county records office, poring over old documents until she found the one thing that connected me to her domain, that ancient water easement. And in her power-hungry mind, that dusty piece of paper was the key to my surrender. The day she cut the water, I didn't get angry. I got methodical. I walked back into my house, poured Sarah a glass of bottled water, and told her not to worry. Then I went to my office, pulled out a fresh legal pad, and began to write. The heading at the top of the page wasn't HOA problem, it was Operation Neptune's Fury. My first call was not to a lawyer, but to the county records clerk, a wonderful woman named Betty whom I'd gotten to know through my commissioner work. "Betty," I said calmly, "I need you to pull the original plat maps for the Whispering Pines development, specifically all utility easements filed between 1975 and 1980. And while you're at it, find me the incorporation documents for their HOA and every revision to their bylaws on file with the county." There was a pause. "Everything okay, Frank?" she asked, a note of concern in her voice. "Everything is proceeding according to plan, Betty," I replied. "Just a little civic matter I need to clarify." I spent that evening not in a rage, but in focused research. Under the glow of my desk lamp, I spread out the digital copies Betty had sent me. The original plat maps, the dense text of the covenants, the easement agreement. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was Colonel Frank Miller, and this was terrain analysis. I was mapping the battlefield, identifying the enemy's strengths, and, more importantly, her weaknesses. And as I cross-referenced the HOA's bylaws with the county's public utility code, a small, cold smile touched my lips for the first time that day. Karen had made a critical error. She had assumed the easement was her private property, a weapon she could wield at will, but that water line, while serving her HOA, crossed my property under a county-registered easement. And any infrastructure operating under such an easement, whether she knew it or not, fell under the direct regulatory oversight of the County Water Commission. My commission. She thought she was turning off a tap. In reality, she had just handed me the master key to her entire water system. The war had begun, but she was the only one who didn't know it was already over. The next morning, I traded my flannel shirt for a crisp suit and tie, a uniform of a different sort, and drove my county-issued sedan not to the HOA office, but to my own office at the county government center. My desk was piled high with engineering schematics for a new municipal pump station and budget proposals, the mundane business of managing water for 500,000 people. But today, my focus was narrowed to a single, unauthorized valve closure in a subdivision full of cookie-cutter houses. My secretary, a sharp woman named Maria, looked up as I entered. "You're in early, Commissioner. Big day." I gave her a grim smile. "You could say that, Maria. I need you to do something for me. Draft a formal letter on official County Water Commission letterhead. Address it to Ms. Karen Bishop, President of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association." I paused, choosing my words with the precision of a sniper. The letter will state the following. "It has come to the attention of this commission that on Tuesday, October 5th, at approximately 900 hours, a water valve controlling a secondary irrigation line operating under county easement 74B was illegally and unilaterally closed without a permit, without a licensed water systems operator present, and without prior notification to all affected property owners, in direct violation of County Public Utility Code, Section 113.8, subsection C." I let that sink in. "Furthermore," I continued, "this action constitutes unauthorized tampering with regulated water infrastructure. The Whispering Pines HOA is hereby ordered to immediately restore water flow through said line within 24 hours of receipt of this notice. Failure to comply will result in an initial fine of $5,000 per day, levied against the HOA, and will trigger a full, mandatory, system-wide audit of all water and sewer infrastructure under your management. The cost of said audit will be borne by the HOA." I finished and looked at Maria. Her eyes were wide. She knew my property was on the edge of that development. She connected the dots instantly. "Consider it done, Frank," she said, her fingers already flying across the keyboard. The letter was a work of bureaucratic art. a masterpiece of passive aggression backed by the full force of governmental authority. It didn't mention my name as the homeowner. It didn't need to. It was signed, sincerely, Frank Miller, County Water Commissioner. I had it sent via a process server, a big, intimidating ex-cop named Gus, who would hand-deliver it to Karen and provide a notarized affidavit of service. This wasn't a neighborly dispute anymore. This was an official government action. The response came less than 48 hours later, not in the form of a phone call or a compliance notice, but as another crisp white envelope from the HOA left in my personal mailbox. Inside was not an apology, but a violation notice. The infraction listed was improper use of a public position to intimidate an HOA board member. The fine was $1,000. Attached was a smarmy handwritten note from Karen on her personal stationery, which featured an embossed, glittery pine cone. "Dear Mr. Miller," it read, "your attempt to use your little county job to bully me is noted. Our lawyers have informed us that the easement is a private matter, and your commission has no jurisdiction. Please pay the fine within 10 days to avoid further action. P.S. How's that orchard looking? Thirsty?" The sheer, unadulterated arrogance was breathtaking. She had taken my official, legally binding order and treated it like a complaint about her petunias. This was the moment I knew there would be no negotiation, no compromise. This was a zero-sum game. Her hypocrisy was a thing of beauty. She accused me of intimidation while actively trying to destroy my property and livelihood. This note, this glittery, condescending piece of paper, was the best thing that could have happened. It was evidence, it was motive. It was proof of her malice. I carefully placed the note and the violation into a plastic sleeve and filed it in a growing binder I had labeled Karen. That binder was becoming my Bible. That afternoon, I didn't escalate. I documented. I took high-resolution photographs of my wilting apple trees. I took video of the dry, cracked earth around the irrigation heads. I got a notarized statement from the well driller who had serviced my primary well, confirming it was in perfect working order and completely independent of the HOA system, thereby proving her stated reason for the shutoff, some nonsense about protecting the integrity of the community water table, was a fabrication. I also called my bank and had them issue a certified cashier's check for the full amount of the illegal fine she'd levied, but I didn't send it to her. I sent it to my lawyer with specific instructions. The check was to be held in escrow, a demonstration of my attempt to comply under duress, which would look very good later in a courtroom. Every action she took, every overconfident scribble on her tacky stationery, was another nail she was hammering into her own coffin. She was so blinded by her petty power that she couldn't see the legal and regulatory framework I was building around her, a cage forged from her own ignorance and hubris. She thought this was a battle of wills. I knew it was a battle of paperwork, and my armory was the entire county code. The 24-hour deadline passed. The water did not come back on. The $5,000 a day fine began to accrue. She probably laughed when she thought about it, assuming it was an empty threat. But the wheels of government, while slow, grind exceedingly fine, and I was the one turning the crank. The next phase of my operation required boots on the ground. Strategic documentation and official letters were one thing, but to win this war, I needed to understand the human terrain. I needed to know if I was a lone survivor on an island of tyranny or part of a silent, oppressed majority. On Saturday morning, I put on a pair of work jeans and a simple polo shirt, leaving the commissioner persona at home. I was just Frank, the neighbor. I started with the house directly across from the now infamous Valve, an older couple named George and Mary. George was a retired Marine, a fact I knew from the faded globe and anchor sticker on his truck. He was out meticulously weeding his flower beds when I approached. "Morning, George," I said, leaning on the pristine white picket fence that Karen had probably mandated. He looked up, his eyes wary. He'd seen the whole drama with the water shutoff. "Frank," he nodded, not stopping his work. "Heard you're in a bit of a bind." I kept my tone even. "You could say that. Karen seems to have taken a special interest in my property." George snorted, finally looking at me. "Special interest is one way to put it. She's the reason we had to tear out that beautiful oak tree. Said the roots might one day interfere with the sidewalk. The tree was 30 years old." Mary came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on an apron. She fined us $200 because George's flagpole was 6 inches too tall. 6 inches. We had to get a man out here with a hacksaw. They were afraid. I could see it in the way they glanced over their shoulders toward Karen's house. A two-story beige monster at the end of the cul-de-sac. They spoke in hushed tones, as if the very air was bugged. I didn't push them to join my fight, not yet. I just listened, nodded, and filed the information away. My next stop was 2 doors down, a younger family with kids' toys scattered across a perfectly manicured lawn. The father, a tech guy named Dave, was washing his car. His story was about a basketball hoop. She said it lowered property values, he sighed, spraying down his tires. We got a petition signed by a dozen neighbors who said they didn't mind it. She declared the petition invalid because it wasn't submitted on the correct HOA form, a form which, conveniently, she said was out of stock. It was a pattern of capricious, absolute control. She didn't wield the rules to maintain order. She wielded them to generate conflict, to remind everyone who was in charge. Each fine, each violation, was a demonstration of her power. But my most important visit was with a man named Bill, another veteran, an Air Force guy who lived on the opposite side of the subdivision. I knew he'd had his own run-ins with Karen over the small ham radio antenna in his backyard. I found him in his garage tinkering with a circuit board. "Colonel," he said, offering a greasy hand, "heard you're drawing fire from the command post." "Something like that, Sergeant," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. "Just doing a little reconnaissance." Bill was different. He wasn't scared. He was angry. "That woman is a tin pot dictator with a checkbook. She tried to fine me into oblivion over that antenna, said it was an eyesore. I had to get a federal communications lawyer to send her a letter explaining that FCC regulations preempt her little HOA rules. She backed off, but she's had it out for me ever since." I had found my first ally. "Bill," I said, lowering my voice, "she's made a mistake. A big one. She shut off my water using an easement that falls under county jurisdiction. She's ignoring a direct order from my office to turn it back on." Bill's eyes lit up with a dangerous spark. "You're the county water commissioner? Oh, this is beautiful. This is poetry. I'm building a case," I explained, "documenting everything. But I need more. I need a history of her overreach, of her levying fines and enforcing rules that are either illegal or applied inconsistently." Bill grinned. "Frank, you've come to the right place. I've been keeping my own file. Let me introduce you to the Whispering Pines Resistance. It's mostly just me and a few others communicating on a private email chain. But we have records." "Oh, we have records." That evening, my dining room table looked like a command center. Sarah and I had spread out maps, property records, and now a stack of documents Bill had given me. There were copies of dozens of frivolous violation notices, angry emails, and even a few recorded conversations. We saw a clear pattern. Fines were disproportionately levied against families with children, single women, and anyone who had ever publicly questioned Karen's authority at an HOA meeting. Her prize-winning lawn, meanwhile, was watered by the community's secondary irrigation system, a perk not afforded to anyone else. It was systematic abuse of power. My final call of the day was to Marcus Thorne, a man I'd served with in the JAG Corps who now ran a private practice. "Marcus, it's Frank Miller." "Colonel," his voice boomed over the phone, "to what do I owe the honor? Don't tell me you finally decided to sue the VA for that terrible coffee." "Worse," I said. "HOA." Marcus let out a long, low whistle. "The suburban battlefield. The last true bastion of tyranny. What's the situation?" I spent the next 20 minutes laying it all out. The illegal water shutoff, the official county order she ignored, the retaliatory fine, the evidence of systemic harassment from the neighbors. When I was done, there was a moment of silence on the line. "Frank," he said, his voice now cold and serious, "this is a gift. She's not just a bully, she's a remarkably stupid bully. She's handed you everything we need on a silver platter. We're not just going to get your water turned back on. We're going to dismantle her entire operation. We'll hit her with a civil suit for damages that will pierce the HOA's corporate veil and go after her personally for tortious interference. While that's happening, you use your commissioner's authority to bleed her dry with regulations. It's a classic pincer movement." The path forward was now crystal clear. Karen thought she was fighting a disgruntled homeowner. She was about to find herself fighting a multi-front war against a unified community, a team of lawyers, and the full regulatory power of the county government, all orchestrated by a man who had spent his entire career planning campaigns. The game had changed and she didn't even know it had begun. The first official salvo from my position as water commissioner was not a letter or a fine, but a formal request for information, a bureaucratic tool as potent as it was mundane. It was a 20-page document drafted with Marcus's legal input, demanding that the Whispering Pines HOA produce a staggering amount of information. I wasn't just asking for records related to the specific valve she'd closed. I was launching a full-scale invasion of her file cabinets. The request, sent via certified mail and posted publicly on the County Commission's website, demanded all engineering plans for their water and sewer systems, all maintenance and inspection logs for the past 10 years, all contracts with utility service providers, detailed chemical treatment records for their community pool, soil percolation tests for their drainage ponds, and the crown jewel, complete unredacted financial statements for the past 5 years, specifically detailing all expenditures from the Utility and Infrastructure Maintenance Fund. This was not a fishing expedition. I knew exactly what I was looking for. During my initial research into the plat maps, I had noticed something odd. The subdivision had been built in the late 1970s, a time of laxer environmental regulations. Their secondary irrigation system, the one Karen controlled, was listed on the plans as a private, non-potable runoff reclamation system. In theory, this was a green idea. Collect storm runoff in retention ponds and use it to water the common areas. But modern county code, the code I was now in charge of enforcing, had stringent requirements for such systems to prevent groundwater contamination from fertilizers and pesticides. Systems of that age were required to undergo expensive retrofitting to install liners, filtration, and backflow preventers. I had a strong suspicion that this work had never been done. Karen's response, which came on the final day of the 30-day legal deadline, was a masterclass in arrogant deflection. She sent a thin manila envelope containing a single-page condescending letter. "Dear Commissioner Miller," it began, "the Whispering Pines HOA is a private entity and is not subject to your department's overreaching and burdensome requests. Our systems are perfectly fine and have been for 40 years. We consider this matter, and your personal vendetta, to be closed." She had attached a glossy brochure for the Whispering Pines community, with a photo of her smiling, arm in arm with the mayor at last year's Community of the Year award ceremony. It was a power move, a clear signal that she believed her political connections made her untouchable. She had just committed her most fatal error. Refusing to comply with a formal RFI from a regulatory body was not a private matter. It was a flagrant violation of county law. It was the legal justification I needed to escalate from request to enforcement. That very afternoon, I convened an emergency session of the County Water Commission's Oversight Subcommittee. I presented the case in dry, factual terms. "Esteemed colleagues," I began, "we have a situation with a private water system operating under a county easement that is in open defiance of a legal request for safety and maintenance documentation. This system serves over 200 homes. Without these records, we cannot verify its compliance with the Safe Water Act, nor can we ensure it poses no risk to the county's primary aquifer." I never mentioned Karen's name. I never mentioned my personal stake in it. I was Frank Miller, the commissioner, a public servant concerned with public safety. The committee, predictably, was outraged. They voted unanimously to authorize the next step, a compulsory on-site audit and system inspection, to be conducted by a third-party engineering firm with the full cost billed to the non-compliant entity, the Whispering Pines HOA. While the official gears of the county were turning, I was making progress on the personal front. The story of Karen's defiance of a county order had spread through the neighborhood resistance network like wildfire. My $5,000 a day fine was now approaching $100,000, a figure that was a matter of public record. People were starting to get nervous. They realized Karen's personal war could bankrupt the entire community. Bill, my Air Force veteran ally, organized a clandestine meeting in his garage. About 15 homeowners showed up, huddled between a lawnmower and a workbench. They were scared but angry. I laid out my plan, showing them the official documents, the legal notices, the mounting fines. "She's put all of you at risk," I said, my voice low and steady. "Legally, the HOA is a corporation, and the board members are its officers. Her actions taken in defiance of the law could make the entire board, and by extension, all of you who pay dues, liable for these fines and the cost of the impending audit." Panic started to ripple through the small crowd. "What can we do?" asked Dave, the father who'd lost his basketball hoop. "The bylaws say we need a majority vote to remove a board member, and she controls the board." "You don't need to remove her yet," I said, leaning forward. "You just need to formally distance yourselves from her illegal actions. I need a petition signed by as many homeowners as possible, delivered to the HOA board, and a copy filed with the county. The petition should state two things. One, that the homeowners demand the board immediately comply with all county regulations and information requests, and two, that you demand a full independent audit of the HOA's finances. This shows the county and the courts that her actions do not represent the will of the community. It protects you." It was a seed of rebellion. The fear in the room began to be replaced by a steely resolve. They saw a path forward, a way to fight back that wasn't just complaining in secret, but taking collective, official action. While they organized the petition, I took a walk to the far edge of my property where the infamous valve was located. It was now wrapped in thick industrial chains with a heavy padlock. A new professionally printed sign had been attached. It read, "Private HOA property, no trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." The irony was rich. She was accusing me of trespassing on my own land. I took a photo of the sign, the chain, the valve. More evidence for the binder. But as I looked past the valve, I noticed something else. A faint, greenish-brown trickle of water was seeping from an underground joint about 20 feet away, creating a patch of foul-smelling mud before disappearing into a nearby storm drain. That storm drain, I knew from the county maps, fed directly into the watershed for the county's primary drinking water reservoir. I knelt down and took a sample of the muddy water in a sterile vial I kept in my truck for just such occasions. The trap was no longer just bureaucratic, it was now physical. Karen wasn't just violating codes, she was actively polluting. The deeper I dug, the more certain I became that this wasn't just about a petty tyrant on a power trip. This was about a cover-up. She wasn't just protecting her power, she was hiding a secret that was far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. The petition circulated through Whispering Pines with the speed and secrecy of a battlefield dispatch. Bill and Dave, my newfound lieutenants, orchestrated it perfectly. They went door to door in the evenings, speaking quietly, showing their neighbors copies of the county orders and the ever-climbing tally of fines. The fear of financial ruin was a powerful motivator. In less than a week, they had signatures from over 60% of the homeowners. It was a stunning rebuke of Karen's authority. They formally submitted it at the next board meeting, a move that, according to witnesses, caused Karen's face to turn a shade of purple that clashed horribly with her turquoise blazer. She declared the petition invalid on a technicality. They had used the wrong font size, a rule she invented on the spot, and had it stricken from the official record. But it was too late. A copy was already on file with the county clerk, a permanent public record of the community's dissent. My civil lawsuit, filed by Marcus, landed on her doorstep the same week. It was a precise, brutal legal document. We weren't just suing the HOA, we were suing her, personally, and the other board members as individuals. The suit alleged tortious interference with property rights, willful destruction of assets, my dying orchard, and gross negligence in the management of the HOA. The key legal argument was that by ignoring a direct, lawful order from a county regulatory body, the board had acted so far outside the scope of their duties that they were no longer protected by the HOA's corporate liability shield. We were coming for their houses, their savings accounts, their personal assets. The lawsuit was the shock, but the impending audit was the awe. I had used my discretionary budget as commissioner to hire the best hydro-engineering firm in the state. They were known for being ruthlessly thorough and beholden to no one. Their team descended on Whispering Pines like a special forces unit. They arrived in a convoy of white trucks, their logos emblazoned on the side, and began their work with an air of grim efficiency. They used ground-penetrating radar to map the aging pipe system. They took soil and water samples from the retention ponds. They sent robotic cameras snaking through the corroded irrigation lines. Karen, of course, tried to stop them. She stood on her lawn and screamed that they were trespassing, that she would have them all arrested. The lead engineer, a stoic man with a clipboard and a permanent expression of weary competence, simply handed her a copy of the court-sanctioned warrant authorizing the inspection, a document I had personally made sure was ironclad. Defeated, she could only watch as they uncovered 40 years of neglect and decay, layer by rotten layer. Meanwhile, I got the results back from the water sample I had taken from the leak near the valve. My blood ran cold. The lab report showed dangerously high levels of E. coli, nitrates, and a cocktail of banned pesticides that hadn't been legal for commercial use since the 1980s. The non-potable runoff reclamation system wasn't just a quaint, outdated piece of infrastructure. It was a toxic sewer. The retention ponds, which Karen had recently landscaped with lovely cattails and decorative rocks, were essentially stagnant pools of poison, and that poison was leaking, slowly but surely, toward the county's primary water source. My personal dispute with Karen had now escalated into a genuine public health emergency. This changed everything. I immediately filed the lab results as an addendum to the public record of the ongoing investigation and hand-delivered a copy to the head of the county health department and the state's Environmental Protection Agency. The wheels of a much larger, more powerful bureaucracy than mine began to turn. Karen was no longer just dealing with a disgruntled homeowner or a county commissioner. She was now on the radar of state and potentially federal agencies. The preliminary report from the engineering firm landed on my desk a week later. It was a horror story told in graphs and chemical formulas. The system's pipes were corroded, the pond liners were non-existent, and there were at least a dozen major leaks, including several that were leaching directly into the groundwater table. The financial records they had finally obtained via subpoena told the other half of the story. For the last decade, the Utility and Infrastructure Maintenance Fund, which should have had hundreds of thousands of dollars earmarked for the legally required system upgrades, was nearly empty. It had been systematically drained through no-bid contracts with a landscaping company called Lush Lawns LLC. A quick search of state business records revealed the owner of Lush Lawns LLC was none other than Karen Bishop's brother-in-law. She hadn't just neglected the system, she had actively defunded it, embezzling the money meant to keep the community safe and channeling it to her family. She had been poisoning her own neighbors, all while funding her lavish lifestyle and her award-winning garden. The full picture was now terrifyingly clear. Her fanatical, obsessive control over the HOA, her willingness to destroy my property over a perceived slight. It wasn't just about power, it was about desperation. She couldn't allow anyone to look too closely at the books or the pipes because it would expose her entire criminal enterprise. My challenging her authority was a threat that had to be neutralized at any cost. By shutting off my water, she thought she was silencing a critic. Instead, she had triggered the very audit that would bring her whole rotten empire crashing down. The trap, which had started as a simple legal maneuver, had been sprung, and Karen was caught right in the middle of it, thrashing about as the steel jaws of justice slowly, inexorably closed in. The publication of the engineering firm's report in the lab results from the toxic leak created a firestorm. I made sure the full, unredacted report was posted on the County Commission's public information portal, easily accessible to any resident or news outlet. Marcus, my lawyer, then sent a certified letter to every single homeowner in Whispering Pines, not just the ones in our resistance network, summarizing the findings in stark, simple language. Their shared irrigation system was a hazardous waste site, the HOA was facing millions in government fines and remediation costs, and the board had been embezzling the funds meant to prevent this exact catastrophe. The letter ended with a chilling sentence. We advise you to consult with your own legal counsel regarding your personal liability as a member of the Whispering Pines HOA. That one sentence did more to shatter Karen's remaining authority than anything else. The threat was no longer abstract, it was personal. Their own homes, their life savings, were now on the line because of her corruption. The local news affiliate, which had previously only covered the HOA for its annual Christmas lights contest, suddenly took a keen interest. A young, ambitious reporter named Jessica Chang called my office. "Commissioner Miller," she said, "I've been reading this engineering report on the Whispering Pines subdivision. These are some shocking allegations. Embezzlement, groundwater contamination. Is this for real?" "Every word of it is a matter of public record, Ms. Chung," I replied, my voice calm and official. "The county's primary concern at this point is public safety and environmental protection. We are taking all necessary steps to contain the threat." I gave her the facts, sticking to my role as a public servant. I pointed her toward the report, the lab results, the mounting fines, and the civil suit. I never once mentioned that the whole thing started because Karen shut off my personal water supply. I didn't have to. The narrative was powerful enough on its own. A corrupt HOA board poisoning its own residents while the government stepped in to protect them. The story aired on the 6 o'clock news. It was devastating. They showed aerial drone footage of the sickly green retention ponds. They had an environmental expert explain what banned pesticides and E. coli could do to a water supply. They interviewed a furious Dave, who held up his copy of the petition Karen had dismissed. "We tried to warn them," he said, his voice trembling with rage. "We tried to hold her accountable, and she told us our font was wrong." The final segment was a reporter ambush. Jessica Chang caught Karen as she was getting out of her luxury SUV at the grocery store. "Ms. Bishop, what's your response to the allegations of embezzlement and endangering the community's water supply?" Karen, flustered and cornered, did the worst thing she possibly could have done. She attacked the messenger. "This is a disgusting, politically motivated smear campaign," she shrieked, batting the microphone away. "It's all lies orchestrated by a disgruntled homeowner, Frank Miller, who is abusing his county position to harass me. He's the one you should be investigating." And there it was. In one short, panicked soundbite, she had publicly confessed that her actions were part of a personal vendetta against me, completely undermining her own legal position and validating everything we had claimed in our lawsuit. Marcus called me the moment it aired. He was practically giddy. "She just handed us the case on a golden platter, a public admission of malice. It's better than anything we could have gotten in a deposition." The news report was the spark that lit the fuse of open rebellion in the community. An emergency HOA meeting was called, not by the board, but by the residents themselves, invoking a rarely used clause in the bylaws that allowed them to force a meeting with enough signatures. The community clubhouse, a building Karen usually ruled like a throne room, was packed to the rafters. People were standing in the back, spilling out into the hallway. The anger in the room was a palpable, living thing. Sarah and I attended, but we sat in the back. I wasn't there as Frank Miller, her neighbor. I had come in my official capacity. I wore my suit, and I had a briefcase containing copies of every relevant document. Karen and the two other board members, a pair of terrified-looking sycophants, sat at a table at the front of the room, looking pale and besieged. She tried to control the meeting, banging her gavel and shrieking about decorum, but she had lost the crowd. They shouted questions about the money, the poison, the lies. Finally, Bill, the Air Force veteran, stood up. He was a big man, and his voice boomed through the chaotic room. "We're not here to talk about the minutes from the last garden club meeting. Karen, we're here to talk about the fact that the county is about to fine this community into bankruptcy, and our homes are potentially worthless because you've been using our dues to enrich your family while poisoning our land. We demand your immediate resignation." The room erupted in applause and shouts of agreement. Karen's face was a mask of fury. "I will not be bullied," she screamed. "This is my community. I built it." At that moment, I stood up and walked calmly to the front of the room. A hush fell over the crowd as I placed my briefcase on the table. "Ms. Bishop," I said, my voice cutting through the tension, "I am not here tonight as a resident. I am here as the county water commissioner." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a thick, bound document. This is the final remediation order from the County Health Department and the state EPA. It declares the Whispering Pines secondary water system a public nuisance and an active biohazard. I let the weight of those words settle. As of 8 a.m. tomorrow, the county is legally mandated to take control of the site. Your entire irrigation system will be shut down, condemned, and excavated. The cost of this remediation, currently estimated at $1.5 million, will be placed as a lien against the assets of the Whispering Pines HOA. A collective gasp went through the room. The number was so large, so catastrophic, it was almost impossible to comprehend. Furthermore, I continued, turning to the other two board members, the district attorney's office has opened a criminal investigation into financial malfeasance and willful endangerment based on the evidence provided in the audit. I would advise you to secure legal counsel. The two board members looked like they were about to faint. One of them immediately stood up and said, "I resign. I had no idea. She told us the landscaping contract was normal." He pointed a trembling finger at Karen. "It was all her," Karen finally snapped. The mask of civility, of control, shattered completely. She lunged to her feet, her face contorted in a terrifying snarl. "You!" she screamed, pointing at me. "You did this! You ruined everything! I will destroy you!" But no one was listening to her anymore. They were all looking at me, at the man who had brought the truth to light. The community had turned. Her reign was over. All that was left was the final symbolic act of cutting her off, just as she had done to me. The morning dawned crisp and clear, a beautiful autumn day for an execution. At precisely 8 a.m., a convoy of heavy equipment rumbled down the main street of Whispering Pines. There was a county utility truck, a backhoe, and a flatbed carrying sections of bright blue PVC pipe. The residents, who had been alerted via an email from the newly forming Interim Citizens Committee, came out of their houses and stood on their lawns. Not in protest, but as silent witnesses. They were watching the death of the old regime. I was there, of course, standing beside the lead county engineer. I was in my official county jacket, holding a clipboard, the very picture of bureaucratic authority. We weren't there to negotiate or discuss. We were there to execute a legal order from the state's Environmental Protection Agency. Our destination was the heart of Karen's personal kingdom, the lush, emerald green lawn in front of her oversized house. Her lawn was her pride and joy, a monument to her control, kept unnaturally green by a constant, borderline obscene amount of water from the contaminated irrigation system she exclusively controlled. It was a symbol of her hypocrisy, watered with the very system she had neglected and the funds she had stolen. We parked our trucks at the curb. The crew, professional and impassive, began to unroll blueprints on the hood of a truck. Karen stormed out of her front door, a vision of rage in a pink velour tracksuit. "Get off my property!" she bellowed, her voice raspy. "You have no right. I will sue every single one of you." The engineer, a man named Henderson, who had seen it all, simply sighed and pointed to me. "Ma'am, I'm just following orders. You need to speak with the commissioner." She turned her full fury on me. Her face was splotchy, her eyes wild. "You will not do this, Frank. This is my home. You are a monster." "Karen," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion, "this is not my decision. This is the consequence of your decisions. The state has condemned this system. We are here under court order to permanently sever its connection to the water main and begin the remediation process. Please step back. This is an active work zone." My calmness only seemed to fuel her rage. She stood in front of the spot on her lawn where the crew needed to dig, planting her feet as if to physically block them. "You'll have to go through me." It was a pathetic last stand, a final, futile attempt to exert the authority she no longer possessed. Henderson looked at me, a question in his eyes. I gave him a slight nod. Two county sheriff's deputies, who had been parked discreetly down the street, got out of their car and began walking slowly toward us. They weren't there to be aggressive. They were just there to keep the peace. The sight of their uniforms seemed to finally break something in her. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a look of utter, impotent despair. She knew she was beaten. She stumbled back onto her porch, slumping into a wicker chair to watch the proceedings. The backhoe operator gave a thumbs up. With a roar of its diesel engine, the machine bit into Karen's perfect lawn. It tore through the manicured sod, exposing the dark, rich earth beneath, and then, a few feet down, the corroded, rusty pipe that was the source of all this trouble. A plumber from the county crew jumped into the hole with a pair of massive pipe cutters. With a grunt and a loud metallic snap, he severed the main feed line. At that exact moment, across the entire subdivision, the sprinkler heads that had been watering the common areas sputtered, coughed out a last, pathetic stream of brown water, and went silent. The most symbolic moment, however, was on Karen's lawn. Her own multi-zone sprinkler system, which had been running on a timer, tried to kick on. A few heads popped up, hissed, and then fell silent. The silence was absolute. Her power, her control, her entire corrupt enterprise had been, in the most literal sense, shut off at the source. She watched, motionless, as her kingdom turned to dust. The lifeblood of her tyranny was gone. While the crew began the noisy work of excavation, my phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "It's done," he said. The other two board members flipped. They gave the DA's office sworn statements detailing Karen's entire embezzlement scheme in exchange for immunity. The DA just issued a warrant for her arrest. Charges are grand larceny, fraud, and a dozen felony environmental violations. I looked over at Karen, still slumped in her chair on the porch, a lonely, defeated figure amidst the ruins of her perfect lawn. The two sheriff's deputies were now walking up her driveway, no longer as peacekeepers, but as agents of the law. They approached her calmly, spoke to her for a moment. We couldn't hear the words, but we saw her shoulders slump. She stood up, turned around, and placed her hands behind her back. The quiet click of the handcuffs being fastened was drowned out by the noise of the backhoe, but I saw it. It was the final ignominious end. The queen was being led from her castle in disgrace. I felt no joy, no triumph, just a profound sense of grim satisfaction. It was the feeling of a mission accomplished, of order restored. Justice, like water, eventually finds its own level. The aftermath was not a celebration, but a period of intense, collaborative rebuilding. With the old HOA board dissolved and its president facing a mountain of criminal charges, the community of Whispering Pines was in a state of shock, but also liberation. The Interim Citizens Committee, led by Bill and Dave, officially took the reins. Their first meeting was not in the stuffy clubhouse, but in Bill's garage, the birthplace of the resistance, with neighbors sitting on folding chairs and coolers, drinking coffee and talking about the future. I attended not as a commissioner, but as a neighbor, a stakeholder. My first act was to help them navigate the complex bureaucracy they now faced. The $1.5 million lien was real, a terrifying debt that hung over every home. But I explained that the state EPA had grant programs and low-interest loans specifically for environmental remediation projects like this. I used my knowledge of the system not to punish, but to help. I guided them through the grant application process, helped them find qualified contractors, not related to anyone on the board, and worked with the county to set up a manageable payment plan for the portion that wasn't covered. The toxic retention ponds were drained and excavated. The old corroded pipes were dug up and replaced with a modern, safe system connected directly to the county's municipal water supply. It was expensive and disruptive, but it was also a cleansing. They were literally rooting out the poison that had been festering beneath the surface for years. As for my own property, the victory was quiet but deeply meaningful. The day after Karen's arrest, I hired a crew. They didn't repair the old valve. They capped it, filled the hole with concrete, and legally dissolved the ancient easement, severing my final connection to the HOA's infrastructure forever. My 5 acres were once again an independent island, sustained by my own clean, deep well. Sarah and I spent the next few weeks trying to save the orchard. We watered it constantly, pruned the damaged branches, and fed the roots. Many of the younger trees were lost, a tangible cost of Karen's war, but the older, more established ones began to recover. Their budding leaves were a small, hopeful sign of resilience. The legal battles resolved themselves with predictable finality. The HOA's insurance company settled our civil suit quickly, paying for the damages to our orchard and all our legal fees. They then turned around and sued Karen personally to recoup their losses. Faced with overwhelming evidence and testimony from her former allies, Karen took a plea deal. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison with a restitution order that would ensure she would be paying for her crimes for the rest of her life. Her house, her car, her assets, all were seized and sold off to help pay the massive debt she had inflicted upon her neighbors. The community itself began to heal. The oppressive atmosphere of fear and suspicion was replaced by a sense of shared purpose. Neighbors started talking to each other again. Dave was able to put his kid's basketball hoop back up without fear of a fine. George and Mary planted a new oak tree. The Whispering Pines HOA was reborn, not as a fiefdom, but as a genuine community organization, with transparent finances and board members who saw their role as service, not rule. They even voted on a new set of bylaws, simplifying the rules and removing the absurdly punitive measures. About 6 months later, on a warm spring evening, Sarah and I were sitting on our back porch. The air was soft, filled with the scent of apple blossoms from the recovering orchard. I was holding a tall glass of cold, clear water drawn from my own well. It tasted like freedom. I looked out over my land, at the fence line where the HOA's neatly trimmed lawns met my slightly wilder pasture. There was no longer a feeling of tension or conflict at that border. It was just a line on a map, a place where one thing ended and another began. We heard the familiar sound of Bill's truck coming up the driveway. He got out, holding a small box. "Evening, Colonel," he said with a grin. "Just came from the board meeting. Thought you'd want to see this." He handed me the box. Inside was one of the old corroded sprinkler heads they had dug up from the common area, mounted on a small wooden plaque. On a little brass plate at the bottom, an inscription read, "Lest we forget." We all chuckled. It was a perfect, dryly humorous trophy from our strange, suburban war. "Things are good, Frank," Bill said, looking out at the sunset. "People are talking. We're having a community barbecue next month, the first one in 10 years. You and Sarah should come." "We'll be there," I said, and I meant it. The fight had started with an act of division, an attempt to cut me off and isolate me. But in the end, it had forged a stronger community, brought neighbors together, and reaffirmed a simple truth, that bullies and tyrants, no matter how much power they think they have, are ultimately no match for a determined person armed with the truth, the law, and a few good allies. My peace and quiet had been shattered, but what replaced it was something better, a hard-won sense of justice in a community that was finally free.